is really very important to us. So please do list your questions in the chat box, or otherwise let us know if you have something to ask, or if you have some other feedback. Your feedback's important to us. And we'll have time following each of the speakers for questions and answers. ABI and the ABI Foundation are deeply grateful to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, who made this event possible. And they've been doing it with other events too that the Chamber Foundation has. So we thank them for not only for their sponsorship today, but for their leadership. And let me also thank ABI Executive Vice President Nicole Crane. As many of you know, Nicole is herself a leader with regard to this issue and so many others. So Nicole, thank you for all you're doing. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear two terrific speakers today. I met them for the first time last February, pre-COVID. It seems like a million years ago, but both of them were speakers at the National Childcare Summit hosted by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. Both of them are terrific. I promise you, you're really going to enjoy them. I'm going to introduce both our speakers, and then we'll get started. Dr. Laurie Todd-Smith was appointed by President Trump to lead the Women's Bureau of the Department of Labor in 2019. She has more than 25 years of experience in education and research. She is the former executive director of the State Workforce Investment Board and State Early Childhood Advisory Council in Mississippi. And Dr. Todd-Smith shared some really terrific things that are happening in Mississippi, and which she led while she was there. She's testified before Congress. She's done all those things that you expect of a high government official. And we're grateful to you, Dr. Todd-Smith, for joining us today. What's also cool is that Dr. Todd-Smith is a former elementary school teacher. She has a doctorate in education leadership from Mississippi State. We have some ABI members who are also Mississippi State grads. They're glad to hear that. And a master's degree from Western New Mexico, a bachelor's degree from the University of Arizona. Dr. Todd-Smith, thanks for joining us. Let me introduce Julia Barfield, too. Julia is Senior Manager of Policy and Programs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. She's also the leader of the Center for Education and Workforce there. She leads the Chamber Foundation's early childhood education portfolio, which, let me tell you, is large. Before that, Julia was with the federal government. She was the government relations manager for Save the Children Action Network. She's also been involved in several social service programs, including Head Start, Early Head Start, Youth Crisis Shelter. She received her BA from Westmont College, interestingly enough, in anthropology and Hispanic studies. She has a dual master's in social work and public health from UNC at Chapel Hill. Go Tar Heels. So thank you both for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Dr. Todd-Smith, please go ahead. We're eager for your remarks. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here today, and thank you for inviting me to speak and share what we're doing here at the Department of Labor at the Women's Bureau. So thank you all the way around for being here today. It's an exciting time. As was mentioned, I am the director of the Women's Bureau at the U.S. Department of Labor, which is the only federal agency that's tasked with representing the needs of working women. It's also the only job in federal government where it's a requirement for the director to be a woman. So I'm very honored to serve as the director of the Women's Bureau in this work that I do. The Women's Bureau, I think it might be helpful. I was going to start with a little bit of background about the Women's Bureau, and what I'd really like to share is some data as it relates to workforce, because I know Julia's going to cover a lot of the childcare parts of things, but as was mentioned, I served as Governor Phil Bryant's Education and Workforce Advisor for 8 years in the state of Mississippi, and really learned a lot about policy during that time. But I like to introduce myself often as a former preschool teacher who somehow became the director of the Women's Bureau. So not sure that that was what I anticipated my future to be, but my passion area and expertise does lie in the field of early childhood after teaching for a number of years in both public and private childcare centers as well, small businesses. So the Women's Bureau, though, was formed on June 5th of 1920, just 2 months before women had the right to vote, or ratification of the 19th Amendment, rather. So We are celebrating our 100-year anniversary, and I never anticipated that our 100-year anniversary would be providing data to you about pre and post-COVID workforce unemployment rates, but that's basically what we're going to talk about today. But it's been exciting to be part of this. So one of the things during my planning of the Women's Bureau Centennial Celebration was to go back and read what former directors of the Women's Bureau were focused on during their times of leadership. And it may be no surprise to you, but as far back as 1920, the Women's Bureau has been reporting about childcare as an obstacle for women entering the workforce. And I found one article that said in 1920, the Women's Bureau reported that women had an increased rate of absenteeism to men in the textile mills. This was breaking news in 1920. They realized that women had an increased absenteeism, probably due to their duties at home of caring for their children. In 1944, there was a report that I found by the Community Services of Women War Workers, and it talked about the need for expanded home child care, where enterprising neighbors could take care of their friends' children, sort of an ad hoc solution to child care that in the 1940s that was being worked on. All the way back to 1944 also, I found one quote that's a little funny, but a little not funny, but it said, that the Women's Bureau reported that mothers kept their house locked until she got home at night, and a neighbor invited the other children to come to her home until their mom came home from work. So again, a little informal, but it was a pattern that was happening in the 1940s. In the 60s and 70s, the Women's Bureau focused on childcare and ultimately created our very first federal child care center, and it's actually at the Francis Perkins building where I work in Washington, D.C., was the very first child care center that still survives today for federal employees. In the 80s and 90s, the Women's Bureau focused on encouraging employers subsidized child care, which has been expanded still. We still face some regulatory barriers. Only 11% of employers across the United States provide this benefit for employees, but 44% of employers provide wellness programs like how to stop smoking or fitness club memberships. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. But COVID-19 has really presented some new issues and new challenges in the United States. And the Department of Labor is really tackling these head on. So I want to provide some data about women in the workforce and accomplishments of women over time. So we have to go back a little bit. Last year, in 2019, women it tied a 67-year record low employment rate for adult women in December of last year. Women actually made up just over 50% of the jobs available in the United States in December of 19. More impressively, if we go back to 2018, women who worked part-time on average out-earned men when they worked on average 5 to 9 hours a week, 10 to 14 hours a week, 15 to 19 hours a week, all the way up 25 to 29 hours a week. Women were making over 100 up to 102% of men's salaries at the part-time level. So even if you were working 35 to 39 hours per week, women's earnings were 103.6% of men's earnings. But where that changes is when women start earning less than men when they hit the 40-hour work week. And it's a little unclear why. We all probably could think of reasons of why that would be, but the Women's Bureau is working on examining that at the 40 hours per week and start looking at the differences in jobs that women take as a result of child care needs. Many of us might choose to work part-time instead of full-time to meet the needs of our children. One study that I think is interesting, offered by Carol Golden at the Center for American Progress, she started looking at this issue too and found that a woman who actually even showed willingness to work longer hours, more than full-time, overtime hours, the employers were actually willing to pay more for that woman to work there for the first 40 hours work. So just a woman's willingness to be able to work over 40 hours increased her rate of pay for the first 40 hours. So interesting numbers. Another important statistic to think about as we talk about childcare, in 2019, 67% of female workforce did not have children under the age of 18 at the home. Those might be moms like me with adult children who are not directly affected by the child care access. We know that 20% of the female workforce have children ages 6 to 17 in age, and 13% of the female workforce have children under age 6. And that's the cadre most affected by this issue at hand right now. I hate to throw so many numbers out, but I find them so interesting. We know that also when we look at the breakdown of data by married women, so 48% of the workforce, female workforce, is married, and 33% of the female workforce has never been married, and 19% of the female workforce is either divorced, separated, or widowed. So when you look at all women ages 16, when you're able to work up to whatever age in the workforce, single women have a higher workforce participation rate than married women. So we know a bit more about that particular population as it was affected by COVID. So when we looked at married women who had the lowest peak unemployment rate in April of 12.8% unemployment rate, they are now at 5.9% unemployment rate nationwide in September of this year. So married women had an unemployment rate in April when COVID, kind of the peak time, hit 12.8%. They've now recovered to 5.9% unemployment. Single women were more likely to be unemployed. In April, single women peaked at 20.7% unemployment rate. So they were the first ones to have that more dramatic drop in the workforce, which fortunately has already been cut in half. It's now at 10.7% in September. But a little bit more on that. We talk a lot about women are just dropping out of the workforce and just not employed anymore. When the real question about childcare comes in, is it really that they're dropping out of the workforce because of childcare, or what are the needs of these women that did drop out of the workforce? We don't know that for sure yet. We know again that single women had the sharpest decline in labor force participation rate, falling from 65.9% in February to a low of 59.5% in April. So right when the pandemic hit, that was the population that dropped out of the workforce most quickly. If we compare pre-COVID peaks, so labor force participation rates for married women decreased 1.9% compared to single, never married women that dropped about 2.3%, and divorced, separated, and widowed women dropped at a decrease of 2.6%. So married women in the age of COVID sort of seems to be providing a little bit of a safety net for women in their careers. Maybe that's because they have more help at home or more resources to help with the children. But the data, Bureau of Labor Statistics data about workforce participation rate of women and their children does not become available until the following year. So be cautious as you look at data. That will come out in 2021, but right now we're just estimating about things that are happening, but the numbers I shared are actually the ones that are available now. So again, we have to wait till 2021 to highlight the women's earnings report in December that come out after the fact. But it's really important also, I did pull up some information about Iowa, and you all are amazing. You're outperforming the national average. Here's what I learned about Iowa. I don't have it at the marital status level detail because again, that's at the state level and it does come out a year after the preceding year. But for one, Iowa has a very high labor force participation rate. I'm sure you already know this, but I was excited to read your numbers. According to some census data I found, In 2018, women ages 16 moving forward in Iowa in the labor force 63.1% of the time, compared to the national average of women of 57% of that same year. In September of 2019, the national unemployment rate was 3.5%. Iowa was 2.8%. So very good numbers in your state in 2019. In April of this year, the national unemployment rate hit an all-time high of 14.7%, and Iowa hit an unemployment rate of a high in April of 11%. Still doing better than the national average. I'm sure that was a shocking number for you all at the time as well. But your September numbers for Iowa's unemployment rate, the national average is 7.9 right now, and yours is down to 4.7%, indicating a very rapid decrease in unemployment since its initial spike caused by COVID-19. When I saw your number of 4.7%, I was thinking, when I worked in Mississippi as the workforce advisor to the governor, I remember being thrilled with our numbers at 4.5%, and that was before COVID even hit. So your numbers are very impressive of whatever you're doing in the state that help with those numbers, and you seem to be recovering quicker than most states according to the data that is available. I want to talk just a minute more about some research about mothers in the states that closed schools or enacted stay-at-home orders. There was a study by the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis and the U.S. Census Bureau that looked at those policies, and they learned that women were more likely to be taking higher rates of leave time with the school closures lately. This is really interesting, of course, because when we look at childcare in the future, we also need to think about school-age children and school closures and childcare arrangements for school-age children. So based on data collected that I found about your state, I think it was from October 26th, and it provided some data about 327 school districts in your state. That may be more, I realize. I think this is from a MCH data center, but 45.3% of your school districts were operating in a hybrid model, meaning teaching online some and some in person. 38% of your districts were open, focusing on the premises, and only 2.4% were all working online. And there was 14.1% that was some other status unknown or pending verification. So the question in my mind is related to childcare needs in Iowa. Is it because 45% of your schools are not fully open yet? Just kind of thinking through how unemployment and the childcare crisis, how closely related could it be to these school closures and the way our public schools are opening or not opening now? When I looked at the data on California on school closures, 55% of their schools were online only, compared to 2.4% of your Iowa schools. And California's unemployment rate is at 11.5%, more than double of Iowa's. So I just got to thinking about what would happen if we were replicating some of the good work you're doing in Iowa to other states as we look at it compared to unemployment rates. So childcare in your state seems to be holding up fairly well, at least compared to school age. There was a bipartisan policy center study that did a survey of parents of children under age 5 in early April, and then they surveyed them again in August. And according to that survey, 61% of childcare facilities closed in April, but by August, only 9% of those providers closed permanently, and 32% were still closed in August, but were planning to reopen. So we're waiting to see if this number is better during the school year. But one more point about that, there's something prior COVID that we in the childcare world call childcare slots, and a gap in availability of slots versus provided slots. And those are slots means spaces, basically. How many are available in childcare slots, and then the potential number of children of parents working in a proximity to a childcare family. So the overall potential gap in this study from that same organization for 25 states that they included was a gap of 31.7%, but Iowa's gap was only 15.1%. So Iowa is performing better than the national average for childcare availability, and potential childcare gap doesn't totally reflect the demand. Keep in mind, and parents, it's kind of omitting parent choice in that. It's just looking at the aggregate numbers. In Iowa, the counties with the smallest potential gap, each of these counties in your state are under 2%. So Adair County, Audubon, Dallas, Johnson, Lynn County, Mitchell, Polk, Story County, Union County, and Warren County all have the smallest potential gap, again, under 2% of the number of children and the availability of slots. So very, very good work again with that. I did want to touch on, for those of you that aren't aware, President Trump did sign the CARES Act, and that provided $3.5 billion in new discretionary dollars, CCDBG, we call them, Child Care Development Block Grant Funds. That came, some came to your state. So 3,575 organizations received payment in your state for childcare for the Iowa Department of Human Services, and they were funded out of that CARES Act. So overall, I think Iowa is doing very well. You're outperforming the national average in both access to care and unemployment. So I think that's something to really be proud of in this difficult time that we are all faced with. The Women's Bureau is going to be continuing to focus on COVID in the country and in Iowa. We're looking at some all policies to help women enter and re-enter and the workforce, and potentially decrease this penalty that exists sometimes for motherhood or women's careers, sort of the debate back and forth. But I mentioned something called employer-sponsored childcare, and you heard in my introduction that I have 25 years. I actually think it's 30. I'm getting older and older. I think I have 30 years of experience with childcare issues, but I learned something new when I got to the Department of Labor, and that was that only 11% of employers are actually offering a perk to pay for childcare. And it seems like such a no-brainer to me, especially when we were all competing for really good employers to come to our plants, manufacturing plants, so to speak. There's a manufacturing company in Mississippi called Milwaukee Tools. And I met with the plant manager when I was working in the state, and he talked about, how can I recruit more women into the manufacturing business? And he said, I've opened up a healthcare facility. What if I opened up childcare? Do you think that might help? And I was like, yeah, that would probably help remove that barrier that makes it so difficult for women. But I also think about the subsidies. Businesses have an opportunity where you could pay for it. So 44% of businesses now pay for fitness club memberships and expanding benefits for their employees, but childcare is not usually one of those offered. Let me pay for your childcare for you to get it out in the community, and you work at my business. I think that's a huge incentive. I learned that there's under the Fair Labor Standards Act, there's an overtime rule that has to do with regular rate of pay, making it very cumbersome for employers, many of you I would suspect, to recalculate someone's benefit or subsidy for childcare if they want to offer that to their employees. If the employee works an hour worth of overtime, you now have to recalculate their regular rate of pay. So the Women's Bureau is going to be spending some time trying to explore that option, raise awareness, try to see if we can, it's not a rule change, it's actually a legislative change that has to happen to exempt childcare from overtime rules, but we'll be having some stakeholder engagement meetings across the United States and working with business and industry to talk about that, so that we currently offer meals and gym memberships and fitness club memberships, but hopefully we can look at this issue of childcare and see if that could possibly be exempt under the same rules. We're also trying to look at the childcare and dependent care credit. As many of you know, American taxpayers who have young children can deduct childcare expenses incurred. The cap on that is $3,000. I'm pretty sure all of you are aware that childcare costs a whole lot more than $3,000 in a year, and it's limited how many of you can deduct it based on your income. So we're hoping to really examine what happens if that credit's expanded, or if we could allow women to use the credit in different ways for multiple children. So just trying to study the impact of that and its impact on women. We're also gathering data right now. We just concluded a national childcare database cost study that's looking at every state in the nation, including yours, and the county level cost of childcare. So that will be in a usable format on our website, I hope sometime in the near future. But we typically report cost of childcare by state, but you will be able to click on your state and counties and see what is the true cost of childcare as you're making decisions for economic development, for potential subsidizing childcare for your employees and other benefits. So we'll be able to use it in research as well. We also are planning to do a large-scale research on the impact of COVID-19 and its impact on the lives of mothers and women in the workforce, and that will be coming in the near future as well. So we will, I'm just trying to see if I've skipped anything else here, but I hope you know how passionate we are in helping and stand ready to serve all of you in your state, and as you move and progress in helping in the role of opening businesses back up and addressing this need of workforce. We also think it's important to look at the future. Do moms really want to see childcare to look exactly like it did before COVID? Do they want to have more home providers? Do they want to be able to watch school-age children and have some flexibility in their work schedules? All kinds of things like that. But I appreciate the time that you've provided to me today to give me the opportunity to talk about that. And and I'm excited about the future of working women. We've made such great gains in 100 years, and I think the future is only going to get better, even despite this pandemic and getting through this time. But if you want more information about the Women's Bureau, we do have a Twitter page at WB_DOL on Twitter, or our website. You can look us up there. But I'll pause there and see if we're going on to our next speaker, or are there questions I can answer for you? But thank you.
Mike, I did just have two brief questions that were in the chat box. One was kind of a comment. There is concern from some manufacturers that we hear that if they don't have on-site childcare, that it's also an equity concern to offer childcare benefits for some. But for those individuals that don't have children, what do they get for a benefit? So that was just a comment that we've heard from someone participating, that they've heard from talking to employees in companies as well.
Yeah, that's good information. Like I said, we're going to be studying it, the impact of it. We'll try to make some really good or inform some good decision making around that equity issue that you brought up in terms of those that have children and don't. Thank you for that. That's a good point.
Yeah, thank you. And then just a question regarding that 2% number that you referenced. It seemed like a lot of those counties were maybe more in the urban area, but where were those numbers from? Someone was interested in diving into those. They were surprised to hear that their county was under that 2%.
I am looking, but I don't have a footnote right in front of me, but I will email that to you before this ends. I'm sure they're going to text it to me. My team is listening in, so I'll provide that documentation. I don't think it says it which one that's coming from. So I'll find that out for you.
Great, thank you. And then another quick question regarding working on a solution for affordable insurance and benefits for childcare providers. And this comes from Jillian, who handles and represents all of those early childhood education centers that we have here in Iowa. And so clearly that's something that we do hear a lot from a workforce standpoint with those in the childcare industry.
I think that's such a good point, and it's something I've racked my brain about in all these years of how can we elevate the profession of childcare. You might be surprised, one of the things we're working on are this is so basic, but it speaks such volumes. When we look at the coding that the Census Bureau uses or Bureau of Labor Statistics uses, when we look at childcare workers as employees, they're in the same coding area as zookeepers and pet sitters in terms of their category, and they're not under education. So we're not even capturing what they're really doing in the workforce because they're categorized as in the wrong space, in my opinion. So we'll be doing some work to even just try to elevate that coding so we can capture more about the profession. I offered to take some members of the Census Bureau actually on a field trip to a child care center so they could truly understand the occupations at hand and how we can best do that. But we are absolutely keeping all those things in the forefront and how we approach trying to stabilize this industry. But if you think about the limited number of funds that come into childcare, we have Head Start funding, we have CCDF funding, we have some state funding. The idea of having employers participate to some extent in employer-sponsored childcare, if you choose to do that, sort of adds even more stability to the industry of childcare rather than saying it should all come from one place. So I'll leave it there, but that's definitely on the forefront of what we're doing and trying to figure out the best ways that we can help children and families and the profession of early childhood. So thank you. And the Bipartisan Policy Center is who provided the data on the 2% on those counties I listed. So I'll send you that information separately.
Nicole, I'm going to chime in here with a couple quick things before we move on. Dr. Todd-Smith, you could not have done a better job of documenting the title of this event when you talk about the intersection of childcare and unemployment, when you talk about Iowa's numbers. We're really pleased in Iowa that our unemployment numbers are lower than the national average, that we've got a great workforce participation rate. But that highlights the problem with our childcare situation. So thanks for doing that. That's one of the reasons this issue is so important here. So thanks again for your remarks and being with us today. And Nicole, I wanted to point out that Molly Veronkun, a member of the ABI Board of Directors, is on today. Molly is president of High Capacity Manufacturer in North Central Iowa and Humboldt. And we're grateful for her participation. So, and lastly, Nicole put some great information based on some of Dr. Todd-Smith's comments in the chat box. So be sure and check that out if you haven't already. And Nicole, I'm done. Are we ready to go to
Great.
Julia?
I'm going to share Julia's screen. We had a little bit of technical difficulty, so I'm going to share screen and hope that comes up. We have Julia on the phone right now, so I will walk through that. Mike, can you see the screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. Hopefully I have it on the, 1 second, Julia, sorry. Making sure that I have it on the right slide. Okay.
And can you hear me okay, Nicole?
I can, yes. And I'm gonna reshare again because I did not have that on the right slide. My apologies. Okay. Give it a minute. Okay, I think we are ready.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for your flexibility with my internet issues. There's nothing like a high stakes afternoon having your internet not work. So I just want to say thank you so much to Mike and Nicole and the rest of your team members at ABI. You all have been incredible partners for us, and it's hard to believe that, Nicole, you and I spoke about 18 months ago, and that's when you all started this work. So just want to thank you for your time and commitment to this issue, knowing that it's a new one for you, but that you're diving right in. And then I also just want to acknowledge Jillian and Dawn. I saw Jillian from the Iowa AEYC chapter. She was a crucial partner for us in creating the report that I'm going to talk a little bit about, but her expertise in the state has been invaluable. And then Dawn Oliver from the Iowa Women's Foundation. Similarly, we created a video to go along with this report, and you'll see Dawn highlighted in that video, and she also has been a great partner for us. So I just want to thank both of you because I saw that you were joining in. So I am a visual person, so I created a PowerPoint, but just know that this is very, this is conversational. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and I'm happy to, pause and talk if you've got questions for the chat. But just for quick background for those of you who are not familiar with the work that we are doing, I am at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and we are the nonprofit branch of the U.S. Chamber. And our whole function is to support chambers and employers in addressing their education workforce challenges. We work with folks in every state and communities across the country, and we're very proud of the work that is being done and want to just serve as, a resource. We're creating tools, we're collecting data, and trying to help the folks who are in states and communities like yourselves move these issues forward and address the challenges and find solutions. So that's our role. And, we started this work in early childhood about 4 years ago. And the whole impetus for it was that we were having workforce conversations, our team was, and found that we could not have a workforce conversation without childcare coming into play. And I don't think that's a surprise for any of you who are listening in or who have been involved in childcare for some time now, but it was something that our team took a pause and realized that we needed to actually create more supportive tools and resources for employers, for working parents, for chambers to really become part of the solution. So to Dr. Todd-Smith's point at the end, we really do want employers to be part of the solutions that are being created when it comes to meeting the childcare needs of working parents. So that's the role that we play. Next slide, please.
Okay.
So just for some background, I usually try to include the slide just because we're all coming to this conversation from different perspectives, and I want to share the lens at which the Chamber Foundation is looking at this issue. I know that folks are coming from it from the child development side, from the working parent side, but this is just the lens at which we're looking through. And I think it helps to explain why I really emphasize a lot of the economic arguments for this issue, not because it's the only argument, but it's how we see this issue. So because I work for the foundation, we are focused on ultimately creating a strong economy. And so we see childcare as a crucial step to bringing us to a stronger economy. So we think that access to high quality, affordable childcare allows us to have a strong workforce. And I'll talk a little bit about that workforce. So when I talk about the workforce, we're talking both our current workers, so working parents today, but also thinking about our future workforce. So a strong workforce to us leads to strong businesses, which ultimately in turn leads to a strong economy. So that's just moving forward, the lens at which we're looking at this issue. Next slide.
Okay.
And as a result, we see this strong workforce being a two-generation issue. So workforce of today and workforce of tomorrow, so that as we are making every investment in increasing access to childcare, we get this dual benefit of both our current employees having the support, reliability of quality care that they need, and that our children, our youngest learners, have the best opportunity for a successful learning in the future and successful career in life. So that's the lens at which we're approaching this issue. Next slide. So the information I'm going to share now is all pre-pandemic. This was from a report that we published a couple years ago, but the biggest thing we heard from employers prior to the pandemic was that they had jobs that they could not fill. So our president of the U.S. Chamber likes to say there are jobs without people and people without jobs. And so we want to solve that issue, right? And prior to the pandemic, we found that about 40% of businesses could not take on more work because they couldn't fill the jobs they had. So that means not expanding to a new building. That means not taking on new projects. And what was projected was that by 2020, we would have 6 million unfilled jobs with that trajectory. Obviously, the pandemic has changed a lot of that, and we can't draw a direct connection between the unfilled jobs and, you know, it's because businesses can't find talent. We obviously have a pandemic that's changed our entire world. But that being said, this was all prior to the pandemic, where we were on this trajectory to have businesses directly impacted by the lack of access to childcare because they could not find skilled talent. They couldn't recruit and retain skilled talent. And we don't think that childcare is the only solution to that problem, but we think it is a very important part of the solution, that having access to childcare meant that more businesses could recruit and attract talent. That meant that working parents could enter, re-enter, or stay in the workforce. Next slide. So just for some background, I like to dive into the demographics of today's workforce because it looks very different than it did 10 to 20 years ago. We have roughly, on average, 12 million children in out-of-home paid care. Again, prior to the pandemic, but every single day we could anticipate that there were roughly 12 million children across this country who were depending on out-of-home care. And for us, we've been calling this the childcare equation. So any working parent on here knows that you are constantly juggling logistics and figuring out who's doing pickup, who's doing drop-off, do you need aftercare? And it's this constant reshuffling of what does your family composition look like, what are your job requirements, and what are your care needs because of those. And so for those 12 million families every day, they are expecting and depending on care to be stable, accessible, and affordable. We also know, and I'm not going to dive too much into this because Dr. Todd-Smith dove a lot into the data specifically around women, but 2/3 of women with children under the age of 5 work outside the home. We know that female labor force participation rate increases for women whose children are 6 and older, and when their children are, you know, under the age of 5, it's lower. And so, again, it's not the only reason, but I think childcare access is a huge reason for that. In Iowa, I'll dive a little bit into the report that we did with ABI and Iowa AEYC, but this is important to note that because Iowa has such high female labor force participation rate, as wonderful as that is, that means that childcare access is crucial to ensuring that that stays high. Next slide, please. So additionally, 8 out of 10 births today are to millennials, and millennials make up 1/3 of today's workforce. So if you are an employer and you just segment out your workforce as, you know, who are millennials and who are women, knowing that these two subgroups are disproportionately impacted by childcare needs, that's probably a pretty significant part of your workforce. So again, it's not necessarily a women's issue. We really see this as an economic issue. Obviously, there are intersections with women and families, but from our perspective, we want to see this as an economic issue because whether or not you have children, whether or not you're a woman or working parent, whether you're not a millennial, this impacts all of us. Furthermore, it's impacting students who are trying to increase their economic stability. And we know that a quarter of all college students are raising children. Having children, we are really thinking about how does our higher education system help support and strengthen our childcare system, and are higher ed, institutions of higher ed aware of the needs of their working parents or their student parents, because, if I can't complete my training program or my degree program because of childcare needs, I am potentially incurring more student debt as a result. And yet the whole goal of pursuing higher education was to increase my economic stability as a family. So I say all of these things because there are intersections to these different subgroups. And ultimately, next slide, please.
Okay, hold on one second, Julie. I had connection issues. I'm going to reshare. So I apologize, everyone.
No problem. No, you're fine. I'm just going to keep going because you know what? This is just like a wing it situation, right?
We're the 2020
situation. Yeah. If we can't learn how to pivot after this year, then I don't know what we're going to do. So ultimately the impact is on businesses, because there are roughly 13 million Americans in their prime working years who have children under the age of 6. And so that is costing businesses significantly in both direct impacts because of productivity rates, absenteeism rates, but also spillover impacts because of, you know, the inability to attract new talent to your state. And we have found that there's roughly $3 billion being lost every year to businesses. I've seen estimates as high as $57 billion being lost every year. So either way, I can't quite comprehend what $3 billion or $57 billion is, but that is a significant impact on our economy and our businesses, especially when we're thinking about trying to recover from, you know, the financial losses that many businesses have experienced. Next slide, maybe. I'm going to dive in just briefly. The next 2 slides are from our report that we published in 2017. So I know the data is a little bit older, but I just want to dive into what we know about the brain science briefly and our ability to really shape future outcomes of children when they are, you know, birth to 5. So if you can see it, there's a graph that should show our federal investments in our education system from 1964 to 2012. And you should see a pink and a blue line that show our national assessment of education proficiency scores of 12th graders. So these are their math and reading scores on average. And this is not a knock on our K-12 system. This is an acknowledgement that we are increasing our investments in our K-12 system and we're not getting the outcomes that we are really seeking. And we know that because when children enter kindergarten unprepared to learn, what we're asking our K-12 educators to do is to catch children up. And unfortunately, we have not designed a system to catch children up. We have designed a K-12 system where teachers are teaching children 1 year of content for every grade level. And that's what they've been designed to do, and they're trying their best, right? But when a child enters kindergarten already behind because they have not had the access to high quality early education that they've needed to really develop the skills to enter kindergarten ready to learn, then teachers in our K-12 system are being asked to catch them up. And again, that's something that we are asking them to do, but they have not been designed to do. And so as a result, we are not seeing our math and reading scores increase with our investments in our education system. And oftentimes what we say is kids up until 3rd grade are learning to read, and from 3rd grade on, they're reading to learn. And so we use 3rd grade reading levels as an indicator to say, are you on track, and do your potential, you know, outcomes look the way that we want them to look? So are you likely to graduate on time? What is your future income looking like? And we use 3rd grade reading levels as a benchmark for those potential indicators. Now, I'm not saying that a 3rd grader is not worth investing in, because he or she absolutely is, but what I'm saying is we have this opportunity in the first 5 years of life to really set a strong foundation. And it's like building a house. You can set a strong foundation from the beginning and then build on top of a house and really know that that foundation is strong. Or you can go through and you can try to fix the foundation that maybe wasn't, you know, laid the way you needed it to or built the way you needed it to, but it is more costly and it's much harder to do. And so we really have the best opportunity in early childhood to lay a strong foundation for children. Next slide. So hopefully you should be looking at a graph that shows the changing demands in our labor market. So now that we are thinking, what is life like after this pandemic? What jobs will be available? We've seen a lot of jobs be lost. We've seen a lot of businesses have to make the hard call to lay off workers. You know, we've seen everyone really take a lot of financial hits. So when we're thinking about the future needs of our labor market, we are seeing that jobs with routine tasks are getting automated. I don't think this is news to anyone, but the jobs or the skills that you and I use every day to be very good at our jobs, so our problem solving skills, our conflict resolution, our critical thinking skills, all of those skills are going to be increasingly needed for jobs of the future. And all of those skills are developed in early childhood. That's the foundation of where they begin. And so again, when we're thinking about how do we set our children up for success in a labor market, in a job market that we cannot quite anticipate, we want to make sure that they are having the skills they need so that they can be successful. So knowing all that, next slide, please. We studied the economic impact of childcare breakdowns in 4 states. So we know that it's important for early child education access for working parents, for our workforce of tomorrow, but what we heard repeatedly from business leaders, from state and local chambers, was that as much as they understood it and they got it, they needed some state-specific data to really help make the case. And they needed some state-specific data so that they could either talk to their members or their legislatures, or both, about why they needed to be part of the solution. So we chose these 4 states for a variety of reasons. The level of commitment to this issue from the state chamber was important to us. Some geographic diversity was important to us. Political landscapes look very different in each of these 4 states. And the childcare systems look very different in each of these 4 states. So we were only able to do 4 last year, but thought that, you know, Iowa would be a great fit for a variety of reasons. One of them being ABI's commitment to this issue and interest in getting actively engaged. As I mentioned earlier, we partnered with Jillian from Iowa AUIC as well on these reports. So if you have more questions about some of the content, definitely reach out to her and Nicole. But top line findings, if you can advance to the next slide, please, is that, oh, and I have one typo. I knew this was going to happen. I shouldn't have chosen Iowa and Idaho in the same year, because I swear I didn't think that they were the same, but every time I say Iowa or Idaho, I always miss one of them up. So apologies for my error in this slide, but we found that in Iowa, on average, when the economy is strong and unemployment is low, the state is losing $935 million every year. So ignore the sub point. $935 million every single year is being lost because of childcare breakdowns. And in a couple of the states, we found that we did some quick social math. And for example, in Mississippi, their loss every year is greater than their rainy day fund. And so we're not talking about some small numbers here. Again, this is when unemployment was 2.8%, I think Dr. Todd-Smith said earlier. So we found that in tax revenue, Iowa is losing $153 million every year. And then the direct hit to businesses because of absenteeism or employee turnover rates is $781 million every year. Again, when the economy is strong and unemployment was low. And this is happening every single year. So when we are thinking about solutions to have states reopen and how to recover, I have heard from many, many employers that the financial hits that they've taken since the pandemic have been significant. But I bring these numbers up because we are already paying for this problem. And so when we're thinking about solutions, we really want to think about how can we engage employers so that they're not paying for this in losses. They're making investments either in public, private dollars, a combination of working parents, changes to the system in a way that we're paying for it in an intentional way so that we don't have a situation where we're just looking at losses. Next slide, please. We found in particular for working parents that more than half of working parents reported missing work due to childcare issues. And I know that that number has increased since the pandemic, I'm sure of it, but we also found that almost 1/5 of student parents had postponed school or training programs because of childcare. So again, these connections with our higher ed, with childcare, we really have this opportunity to strengthen the way that families pursue education or pursue increased economic stability. And in Iowa, we found 2 other interesting statistics. One is that 69% of parents said that they relied on some other family members for some portion of their childcare support. So that's, again, what we're calling the childcare equation, as nearly 70% of families said, okay, we've got some combination of care coming from either an aunt or uncle, grandparents, whoever. And when you think about COVID, we've asked families to stay at home or, for public health reasons, not to interact with more people. And so for a lot of families who depended on a grandparent, they may choose not to engage with them because they're at risk of, spreading the illness or worried about high-risk populations. Well, when we're thinking about the role that that plays then on folks' childcare equations, we've really thrown a wrench into every scenario. Additionally, one other point I want to make is that 52% of parents who voluntarily left the workforce, so they weren't laid off, but they decided for their family's best interest, one parent needed to leave the workforce for childcare reasons. 52% left the workforce when their child was under the age of 1. So I bring this up because when we're thinking about solutions, oftentimes folks think, okay, pre-K is the answer, right? Because it's 4 and 5-year-olds, let's just add on, another year of school. And it's important to remember who our most vulnerable working parents are. It's when, folks are either coming back from having a baby, or it's 12 months, 16 months into having a child, that working parents are really feeling the stress. Versus when a child is 4 or 5, parents oftentimes see the light at the end of the tunnel. They've gotten several years under their belt to figure out their solutions. So I bring that up because for any employer who's trying to think, how do I best support my working parents? I think it's very important for you to understand what age a child is when parents are choosing to leave school or work or a training program. Next slide. So since COVID-19, we have, and I'm just going to breeze over this because I think I'm a little bit behind, but we've looked at the impact on both childcare providers, many of whom are small business owners themselves, and oftentimes we don't even think about them as small business owners. We've thought about the impact on work. Temporary childcare solutions. And knowing that the pandemic is not over and we're still unsure of, what a lot of businesses are going to do, we have to understand that parents aren't able to hold out too much longer. And many of them have had to make some tough decisions about their employment. Next slide, please. So we also have surveyed, we've done 2 employer surveys to understand the decision-making that employers are making when it comes to their return to work plans. And a data point that I am very proud of is that 92% of employers said that they are aware of the childcare needs of their employees. Now, I don't have that stat pre-pandemic, but I can guarantee you it was not 92%. And so if there is a silver lining, I think the recognition here for employers, and I think the importance of childcare has come to light since the pandemic. I think, there has been more transparency between working parents and their employers than there was previously. I recognize that there are some power differentials and not everyone feels able to disclose their childcare needs with their working or with their employers. But I think, having 4-year-olds joining Zoom calls or trying to balance caregiving needs overnight has really brought to light the fact that employers are increasingly aware of the childcare needs and trying to find solutions. So not surprisingly, the number one solution that employers have offered is flexible work schedules. I think there are, and we can dive into this at another conversation in the Q&A, whatever, but we have seen solutions fitting for different industries or companies of different sizes, not because, there's a one-size-fits-all solution. On-site care doesn't work for everyone, but I think the initial step of awareness of the childcare needs is a huge point that we can't forget. And so, if you're an employer, I would really encourage you to speak with your working parents and understand what their childcare needs are, understand how they've changed, and ask them what they want you to do. That may not be possible for everyone, but that's something I've spoken with a lot of employers about. They have agency in being part of the solution. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Nicole.
Well, I think Nicole may still be having some issues. If not, she'll chime in here. But we do have one question that I wanted to pass on to both you, Julia, and Dr. Todd-Smith. And by the way, the question was asked, thank you, Kathy Anderson, will this presentation be available afterwards? And it will be. We'll get it posted to the ABI website. But here's the question. Chrissy asked, community development block grants are available for building, air quotes, for building a new center. And that's wonderful. But in their community, they're opening a new child care center and they don't want to build a new center. They want to go to a leased building. They're not finding any programs for assistance with that. Do either of you have any knowledge about programs they might try? And if not, we'll try to research that question too. But in the meantime, any response for something like that, if they want to lease a building instead of build a building?
You know, can you hear me?
Yes.
I saw that question and I was actually trying to look up while she was talking. I know that the small SBA, Small Business Administration, did have some grants that were used, and I know that the CARES Act grants are available, but I've heard lots of discussions about this need for new child care that potentially wants to open up like she's describing. So I think it's possible we would see that in a future COVID relief bill, but I will keep thinking as well. But SBA loans are definitely one of the areas, and we can link you to that information.
Great. I think we've got a great SBA office here in Iowa. We'll talk to them too. And thanks very much for the heads up. I hope everybody can see Tammy Foley's message in the chat. Thank you, Tammy. That's great information. Okay. Oh, and then Jackie Andrews says, and thanks for being on today, Jackie. They tried CDBG, but they didn't meet LMI guidelines. So we'll work on that one too. And then, Nicole is apologizing for technical issues. That's okay, Nicole. I think we're getting everybody handled here. Any other questions or comments for our speakers today? We always want to be respectful of everyone's time, and we know we said we'd be done in an hour. We've gone just a little long, so anything else? Dr. Todd-Smith and Julia Barfield, we're really grateful to you and your leadership on these issues. Thank you, and thank you for the information today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You bet. Okay, Nicole, unless you give me a message, I'm going to close this.
I think we're good, Mike. Yeah, we appreciate everyone's time. As you said, that wrapped it up great. So if anyone has any questions or like more information, feel free to reach out directly to us and we can get them in contact with the right people.
And we'll follow up on these questions we have here. And with that, everyone, thank you so much for your time and participation. We really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Trying to get the Hey Julia, how are you?